And we're live. Welcome, everybody, to the first of the year Performance Roundtable of Code Review. And we'll get right on it. Before we get into the topics that are open, there's a few housekeeping discussions that we need to cover. The first is that since we moved to having the issue board and discussions moved to separate issues, the participation on the meta issues that we've been creating weekly has declined, obviously, because discussions can move to the issues themselves. And I see that as a bonus, as a positive thing. But it does question the act of creating the issue every week. So I was wondering if we should just discuss this a little bit better here. What should we do about those issues? Should we keep one issue and don't close it every week? Just keep that for like catch-all questions and stuff like that? Or should we move to monthly issues, or just stop creating the issues and use the board to visualize the topics being proposed by other people, or any other option? What do you all think?
Yeah, I think questions, those kind of general questions that we're going in there, those could be in the agenda too. I don't want to lose track of them, like for transparency purposes, but it seems like the things that we were discussing that aren't in those issues, those might fit in like an agenda or this recording.
That's what's been happening anyway. Yeah, I guess. Right. Any other thoughts? So I'm guessing you're suggesting, Matt, stop creating the issues and use the board and the agenda.
Yes. Yep. That's what I was thinking.
Kai, do you have any thoughts? Do you feel the need to keep the issues?
I think the only thing I could say against issues in favor of keeping like the weekly roundup is just there's a perceived amount of overhead to create an issue, So if I have like a random like little tiny idea that's really only a sentence or too long, like, is that worth creating an issue? There really isn't any real work to create an issue, obviously, but psychologically there might be a hurdle for some things.
That's fair. I don't oppose to keeping one running issue open for those things, and I could craft one final issue to kind of like cover the next couple of months, where you would direct people to open issues with those labels. But if you have any questions for us, just drop it on this issue, and then we keep it running and we stop doing weeklies. I think it's the most like it covers all grounds. It doesn't have unnecessary work every week. It doesn't have this like moving target for discussions, because every week, like, you put a comment there, it disappears. You put a comment there, it disappears. So for transparency reasons, having one ongoing probably beats best. It doesn't have any overhead. People just decide to go to the issues themselves. So it feels like the option one might be more inclusive for everybody. Agree? Or anybody disagree? Okay, so I'll go forward with option one. I'll make that my bias for action and just to keep this moving. But yeah, we can iterate on it. Can I move on? Anybody has any thoughts before we move on? I just had to cough. Okay, cool. The next one, we had set December 15th as the reassessment date to see whether these calls were being useful or not. I have a little summary here. So we've noticed a little bit of a low attendance in the past couple of weeks, but it could be because holidays were ramping up and people taking time off and stuff. But it feels like we still have very valuable topics ongoing and in flight and coming out of these discussions. So I feel like at this point, it's unnecessary to do a more formal assessment with a poll and all that stuff. So I would propose moving a more formal assessment, or whether we should continue these calls, to somewhere in the middle of Q1. What does everybody think?
I agree with that. Holidays make everything more complicated and confusing to decide.
Okay, thanks. Matt, Kai, objections? No, all good?
No, that sounds fine. Yeah, I think Carrie's right. We should hold off on because of the holidays.
Okay. All right. Proceeding as proposed. Cool. So we go into topics then. The first one is something I believe I created, and we briefly touched it on the previous call, but again, it's also a more front-end topic, but I'll just cover it very quickly for your edification. So the plan team is playing around with the persistence of Apollo cache queries, meaning that if you do a query for labels, for example, when you're in an issued list, the next time you visit that page, if it was very shortly after, you don't have to go to the server again to get the list of labels, the initial list of labels, so the experience is much snappier. And this is in the context of a bigger effort from Tim and the Snappy GL kind of thing, but that's been covered before. But in this particular case, they're improving one specific use case, that one of the labels. And this issue is more for us to kind of like think, is there anything similar that we could benefit from in our world of code review? Of course, the most obvious one would be labels in merge request lists. I'm not fully aware whether their work would benefit merge requests as well, or if we'd have to port that as well. But thinking about the merge requests, the only things that could directly benefit would be stuff about that are we using GraphQL for, reviewers and stuff like that. So beyond that, there might be other opportunities for us to benefit from this kind of strategy to persist data. I think they were starting with local storage, but then potentially iterating later to IndexedDB. So there's a couple of links there. I see that the draft merge request isn't merged yet. I'll catch up with Natalia about this soon so that we can see where they are. But if anything happens that I feel like are more, there's movement there. If I see anything worthwhile for us, I'll bring it up again here in these calls. But at this point, no further specific things on my end. Does anybody have any questions on it?
Do you just have like two caches then? Like, are we just this sounds like a weird question, but like,
no, go ahead.
That doesn't feel like a great end state to have multiple caches. We already do like a lot of backend caching and then like front end caching, and then like we already have enough challenges in validating cache in one spot. Like this feels like it's going to create more pain in places. And we do have a lot with all the real-time work, like we're moving basically everything into GraphQL that's interactive. So it just means like, I don't know. That sounds, as a not engineer, this sounds like multiple regexes, but in cache form.
Multiple problems surmounting. Yeah, it's a fair question. The way I see it is it's used sparingly. We're not going to be like, it's going to be opt-in. So you're going to have to move them. You have to migrate the queries you want to be persisted yourself. And this is more like between page loads. And some of the times the queries are very user specific. So even maybe the backend isn't even caching that much because it's very user specific. But for us in the browser, we can make some decisions. The labels, I think, was the most obvious one where many users open the merge request or the issues list very often, and that initial load only changes when there are label changes on the project or on the groups that you're in, which is a far less frequent event. And then again, if you're searching for one specific label, you're going to type your query, and that query will probably not be cached across pages. So you still go through to the server. So I think it's just being careful about what we choose to persist will be key to making this useful. But for the things that are, so in terms of perceived performance, seeing the labels pop up immediately when you revisit the page will be impactful. So that's the kind of questions we need to ask ourselves for code review. What's those kind of actions? The other thing that came up recently was the at mention lookup, having a way to reuse participants in the issue or merge request. It will be the next. I think there's an issue somewhere about that we haven't covered here yet, I think, but that will be the next obvious improvement. So I'll keep following that topic more in the front end capacity, but I'll keep bringing stuff up that might be relevant to us. Should we move on? Next one. Okay. So the next one is split and paginate the file tree from diff's metadata. And this has been covered a couple calls here. Let me just open it again. Share the screen so that we can keep it in the recording. So from this end, what I know is that there's a proof of concept that Patrick created that splits out the endpoint for the file metadata to another one, specifically for the file tree. And we have what's happening? Spike, evaluate performance benefits. We have a spike scheduled for this milestone that Stanislav will be looking into when it gets back from PTO, about validating the performance benefits of having a separate endpoint and what are the limits where this makes sense and where it stops being beneficial. We will be looking into validating that POC, and then eventually we'll follow up with an implementation that might end up land in production. But apart from that, I'm not sure if there's any outstanding topics to be discussed. Does anybody know? Anybody? Because I feel like we could remove the refinement label on this issue and stop revisiting it every week. What do y'all think?
Yeah, it seems like it's moved forward from that place.
Okay, so I'll do, for the sake of efficiency, I'm removing the refinement. There we go. Label here, as it seems like the topic is being pushed forward in its own MRs. I have scheduled work. And then Patrick, I'll CC Patrick just to make sure, Patrick and Stanislav, make sure that we, in case they have something outstanding, AI, that actually unlabel the refinement. There we go. All right, one less. Remove refinement label. All right, cool. Virtual scroller. I believe this would require, it's kind of stalled. So I'm gonna go, and I think this is covered. If you go to the board, just see, there's a couple of scheduled issues about this, I believe. Scheduled or, something about server-side rendering. There we go. Investigate performance improvements of switching back to server-side rendering for the diffs app. I feel like this came from this virtual scrolling discussion. So it feels like we also might be able to drop it off from this. So I'm going to tag Stanislav and Phil. Can we close this issue yet? since we have issues for server side. Does anybody have any questions on this topic? And then we'll leave it at that. There might be some things that we want to still investigate.
I think there's an issue open to do the virtual scrolling in the file tree.
Is there?
I know there's an issue open for virtual scrolling in file tree.
Oh, can you hunt that down and add it to the agenda so that I can then later check? I don't think it has the label of the performance roundtable, so that's probably elusive a little bit. So thanks for that mention.
I just added it.
Awesome. Okay. All right. Ooh,
I just
okay.
added the label for you too.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, so we added label to this. Cool. So we can skip that discussion. I guess I think the missing parties the relevant parties are missing from this call. So I'll just leave it up to them to kind of like close it off. Which brings us to this one, suppressing files and diffs to reduce overall payload. I haven't followed much on this, but I think we had movement recently, right?
Perry and I were talking about something related, but maybe not related yesterday.
Yeah, I remember that. Your point was whether we should just, instead of suppressing them completely from the backend and everything, we'll be just like collapsing them and having a link to load the full thing, right? Is that issue created? Should we create an issue for it and potentially schedule it? What's your thoughts there?
It's based in the, so there's it's based in the, it may be based in like the larger issue, but it's like, I think Carrie and I were talking about like, currently you can use Git attributes and label something as a binary file, and then we will not render a diff for you. And so we're debating about whether or not we're talking about whether or not that actually reduces any payload stuff. I hadn't followed back up yet to see if I had made sense of it, but I think like, yeah, Carrie had suggested like, well, we could have a front end option to show the diff, which I think would be a good improvement if people were manually suppressing diffs, but I don't know how many people manually suppress diffs. Like, I don't think that's a common thing, because I don't think that's actually, I don't think people want to suppress diffs. They just don't want them unless they want them, I think is maybe the better way to think about that. Like, and the suppression is like the Git attributes one is super heavy handed. Like if you say text files are binary, like that's it. We're never showing you that file as a diff ever. And there's no way to get that back unless you go check in like a new Git attributes file that doesn't say that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, binary is the easy one, right? Because like humans can't read it. So why even bother? But it gets trickier when it's like any file type could be considered useless. And I think part of this issue touched on like the auto-generated diffs, like very, very large config files that like, yeah, nobody really needs to review that. I just worry that like everybody's going to be one like, wow, I really wish we had reviewed that issue from complaining about it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's why like I like how others handle this, in that like it is suppressed. And I think from my perspective, like the idea of making this a performance thing is like, if we could suppress in the sense that like, we don't ever go get anything from the back end unless someone explicitly asks for it, that feels like a savings in terms of like not asking giddily for it. Although we've got to ask for like the file, I guess, to know that it exists. But like if we don't get the diff, we don't highlight it, we don't do all those things. Like it feels like there's performance savings there, and it feels like there's a standard set of files that people generally agree don't need to be shown all the time, maybe if they want to. I think the library that I linked is like sort of where that comes from, but like to me that feels like we gain it's performance because we're going to reduce payloads on like certain types of merge requests that contain certain files, right? Is it going to be like everything? I don't know. I doubt it. Is it going to help with a lot of our customers who have merge requests that change 250 files and 20,000 lines? Probably. They're probably the kinds of customers that benefit from something like this. And so it feels like we get something there, but I agree, like it has to come with the front end piece of like you click load diff anyway, and we go and we do all that rendering, and then there's a spinner, and eventually it comes back and loads. Like that has to be there. Like it can't be pure suppression. It's got to be suppression with a way to get to it. But yeah, I don't know that I like investing in like the get attributes hack, because I think that's sort of like a weird thing. But maybe if we need the front end viewer for that anyways, it like gets us that part covered now. I don't know. I think that's the thought.
Well, the neat thing about the get attributes hack is that it's something we can point to right now for people that are having this issue. We can point them to it. So not to say that it's a great solution, but it's a, it's a nice tourniquet that stems the bleeding. But also we already have through having that be there, we already sort of have the structure in the code to go in and say, yes, don't show, don't highlight, don't cache, don't show, don't send these manually specified files. We can add onto those pathways. Also, don't do these ones that we've determined algorithmically aren't correct. Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're never hiding any changes, because that would be the sin.
Do we have I was gonna say, do we have a viewer for the suppression one? Because that has a special message in it. So I assume it's using its own viewer then, right? Like if it's because those files, if you suppress them, say this diff was suppressed by an entry and get attributes. Like if you were to add like if you could change that and like put a line below it that says load anyway, like I assume we already know this is happening, and then it's just a question of what does load anyway call. Is that reasonable?
Yeah,
does like the logic exist for something for like a button to call, or is there work to get like the call that would have to be made to like go and then render the diff?
Before this part of the conversation, I would say that I was 98% confident that we had a like fetch the diff for a single file, and now I'm like 80%. You're convincing me we don't have that.
Yes, I have something non-diffable, not diffable. And then this is the message that we show. So yeah, we do have a viewer for this. We might need another flag to distinguish this from whether it's a file encoding or not, whether it's actually.
Yeah.
We can also add a copy to like try to show it anyway, and then it just tries to do it anyway when the user clicks. Yeah, we do have a viewer that's answering your question.
Yeah, it sounds like we'd need another viewer though, because like you'd have not diffable where like it's legitimately not diffable, and then you'd have like suppressed diffable.
But we have the infrastructure for those viewers.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Okay.
Not necessarily new stuff, just a different behavior. Yeah. So that seems schedulable for the upcoming milestone. Right?
Yeah, I think that that's mostly going to be front-end implementation with back-end making sure that Carrie's dream of a single file diff endpoint actually exists, right?
And you need a new backend for not diffable versus suppressed, like via get attributes, right?
So we have one part which is the flag that tells us to render this viewer, and the other is getting the actual content. We already have that on some files. I can't remember what it was. Is it the moved file that we added an option to render the file anyway or something? Can't remember exactly what it was. But yeah, the endpoint that you talk about, it's like the unicorn. We think it exists, but we haven't seen him in a while. So
there's also
yes.
I also remember adding this option to like fetch a single file or filter for
I remember
file
that
at some point.
something for Justin at the time.
But also I think we would need something in the back end too, and I'm just saying this out so it's real, to kind of bust through that special casing, because otherwise we're going down the same pathways. It would fetch it from Gitly, we would process it to do caching and highlighting and say, oh no, it's get attributes prohibited, and then we would never
right.
So we would need a direct line to Gitly basically at that point.
So what I'm reading and from what I see, I think we're missing an issue for this. We only have the meta issue.
We probably could do. I don't even know. Do you know what the issue was that we were talking in Carrie? Like, I wonder if we do it in that issue. No, we probably would need a different issue, because I think that one's more broad, because it wants to like auto collapse things. It's certainly related to that concept, like, but this isn't going to be auto collapsing. This is going to be like user initiated suppression. Then I wonder though, like, do you really want people creating get attributes files that call a bunch of stuff binary to like hack this together because we've made it more palatable? Like, is that really the right, like, what happens when we fix this in theory, like, and we do something that's smarter and like is auto suppressed based on standards? Like, people need to go and unwind all of their get attributes, sort of like weird suppression. And I don't know what the it'd be good to know like what the downstream effects are of labeling telling Git that a bunch of stuff is binary. Like, what happens in other diff tools and other editors? Like, what happens when you try and open these things like across the board? How much does other stuff complain or freak out?
Would this be a good opportunity for us to dog food the solution? So at least we can use the get attributes patch to trigger the behavior for now in order to prove that the behavior is valid and useful.
Do we have things in the GitLab project that you would want to suppress?
No, but like this is one of those problems where it's like, this isn't a problem for me. Like, the problem we're trying to solve isn't a problem. So I'm like, I guess you don't want to see the diffs. Like, okay. I don't know, maybe
there's probably
like
customers with a use case. Sorry to cut you off. Probably one use case for a customer that has these MRs all the time, every day, and it's a big nuisance, I bet.
Yeah.
Sorry, Gary, did I derail your train of thought?
No. That's completely it, right? Where it's like, yeah, if we can just find that one person, yeah, we should always look to ourselves to be that person, right? First, but if we had one particular customer in mind that we could say, hey, would you mind doing this? I don't think it would mess up any other tools, but it would be nice to know that before we launched into it.
Okay.
Especially if we think that we're going to do an iterative solution later on that is not get attributes, that maybe or it's its own, it could be its own namespace in the get attributes file. I don't know if it's that extensible. I've never really played around with Git attributes, but if it is, maybe we can do like a GitLab dash suppress diff or something like that. Or if we just need to build a UI for it at some point.
Yeah. Do we have everything we need at this point for taking this forward, though? Like, there's a similar. I caught the issue you were discussing yesterday. So either put that forward or create a separate issue. Kai, do you want to take that action?
Yeah, I'll create a separate issue. I think, let me think about that. I think we could go ahead, make the viewer nicer if you're manually suppressing. And I would say we don't widely advertise that that's a thing. And we wait and sort of see, maybe we mention it in that issue because there are people in that issue that are potentially doing it. See what kind of feedback comes from it after we roll it out. And if it works or doesn't work, like that may be a way to test it. Because I think I would love to dog food this in some way, but I don't know that we have any projects. I don't know if like,
yeah,
the only people that might could be like the infra delivery team. Like it'd be worth checking with them potentially because they would end up in like the generated code realm, I think, of cookbooks or whatever they call them. I don't know what they use now. When I was chef, it was cookbooks. I don't know what it is now. So like they might end up in that realm.
Okay. So separate issue seems to be the way to go.
Yep.
I'm gonna add it to do. Do you want to take care of that?
Yeah, I'll create one.
Okay. Putting you. Okay. Trying to put your name. Right. Cool. Right. So there's no other open topics. There's still things ongoing that are scheduled or in the pipeline to be scheduled or something. So we don't really have to discuss them here. But does anybody have any other thing that is in the back of your mind that you want to talk about before I move on to some leftovers? I know there's some things flying about HTTP caching that I think Patrick is assigned or working on. But those seem to be, oh, by the way, Kai pinged me yesterday, OKR, about the OKR for this POC things. So we set ourselves to create 2 POCs and validate 3 ideas. Feel free to take a look after the call. So if you have any thoughts or suggestions to add there that I might have missed, feel free to add them. This is for us on the call and for everybody watching the recording, because I know you'll be watching. So no other things to talk about? Can I go over to the leftovers? All right. So this is something that has been in the back of my mind, and it's very selfishly something that I've pushed in the past. Kai, you know this has popped up frequently in the past, and it just reminded me, new year, I just wanted to make sure that we revisit this and we know what's the blocker at this point for rolling this out. Is it not enough representation of users being caught in this flow? Is it the UX concerns? Can we just go over quickly these 2 things to see what's the holdup? In case they're fully blocked, they're blocked, but in case they're unblockable, we could probably take some time to unblock them. So the first one is, don't load all the diffs ahead of time when using show one file at a time option in an MR. So this is something that is a leftover from our primary implementation of the show one file at a time. We're still batch diffing as usual, but this basically incurs in the memory costs that we have for the full diff, which stops the show one file at a time from being an actual alternative for really large MRs, because it's still going to use the memory of the browser. Despite not rendering the components, there's still a lot of data being stored. We have other things working towards decreasing that memory usage, but wondering, do we know exactly what's blocking this from moving forward? It's being labeled as a stretch, and it's kind of like flowing over from milestone to milestone. Is there anything stopping us from picking this up? it's not that heavy either. The only thing that this would change is when you're navigating to a different file, you probably have a little wait. Oh, we might have that pending API thing to get the file actually. So we can do some investigation around that, I guess. Any other things that we know about for this issue?
You really need if we just had like an endpoint where you could load the diff for one single file.
Yeah. So this is that unicorn we were talking about earlier. Oops.
Yeah.
So we were talking about the last thing that this issue has is this comment from me for trying this URL exactly with the path. I did some reverse engineering on the Ruby code and try to identify exactly how this works, passing path, passing path with the parentheses and stuff, with brackets or whatever you call it. And none of it worked. So if we can figure that out, whether we do have that option and we're just a problem of front end looking at Ruby code.
Okay. The only thing I'll point out is in your example URL there.
Yeah.
It's path singular. It's path singular. In the back end, it's paths. Plural.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes any difference.
Right. Exactly. So this returns empty, and then even if I remove the thing, also not, well, paths plural should be an array. Yeah, it doesn't even accept it. So it does come up with empty. So there might be something I'm doing wrong for sure. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to leave this comment here. And then should I looking for insights backend. There we go. So off the call, if you have any clarity here, this could be unblocking this issue because from the front, it isn't that much of a heavy lifting, and the benefits for those people using those modes could be huge. Any more thoughts, Kai? Now that I mentioned the users using that, because we don't really, yeah,
I was looking into
the numbers,
and I need to there's two metrics, and I don't know how to distinguish them. One is really low, like in the like tenths of a % of users use that mode sort of range. So if that is the case, then like, I think that's where this is like potentially not a worthwhile thing to spend time on, right? If that is the number that I think it is, then
okay.
But I can confirm that for you. I think the idea makes sense, but if nobody uses the mode, then like,
then that brings us to the question: do they not use the mode because it's still slow? Do you know what I mean? And yeah, we should probably check the numbers, because there's one thing which is enabling the mode, and the other is loading the diffs in that mode. I'm sure we're tracking it properly, but the two different things.
Yeah, the number that I think it is the really low number based on what I just saw. So
okay. But again, it's a 2-point weight. We can still take care of it outside of deliverable work in terms of like performance tidying up. Again, this isn't like world-changing improvements, but it could be something worth like closing the loop on sometime when we have capacity. Again, we're still looking for insights from backend. Once we have that unblocked, this would be a fairly walk in the park, I expect. I'm moving on to the next issue for the sake of time then, which is similar, but not exactly. So this applies to all modes, but so this is similar to something I think I described in the issue, which is to selectively load the MR diff when following the comment link. And this actually applies to any link. If you follow to a link to a file or something, we don't have to load all the other files to render that particular file. This strategy is used in other websites like Imgur and stuff to make it get you to the content you're pointing at as quickly as possible. And depending on the MR, this can have immense user experience impacts, because if you're pointing to the last file on the batch diffs, you're going to have to wait for all the batch diffs to finish before you jump to that file. if we only select that, if we only load that file, then it's immediate, right? I think it might be hung up on the backend endpoint paths thing that we're just talking about as well. But there's also here the UX concern, I believe, right, Kai?
There's a design issue that I was looking at, and it looks like it suffers the same problem as the other, which is we don't know which file to give you. We have to go get all of the files and page through them just like we do in single file mode.
But because we don't have the endpoint?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. If the endpoint is sorted out, then these issues get unblocked. I'm more concerned about the UX of it. Like you're landed on an MR that has 50 files and we're only giving them one, making sure that we tell them and make it absolutely clear that you're only seeing a subset of the DMR is key. So that's where I think the UI, there's a Figma file, I guess.
Yeah, there's a design link, and I think the design stuff is like, could probably be revisited and just make sure that like everyone's content with it. But I think I don't know, a year ago, Phil basically had the same concerns that like, we don't know how to get you the right file. So we're not actually going to save you anything yet because we can't.
Right.
We can't do that. So if you saw the endpoint thing, we could revisit this. So I would say like, if we want to look at both of these, then let's figure out if there's an endpoint here. I'd also say like looking at that one, it'd be worth revisiting that issue in the context of the restructuring effort, because the restructuring effort sort of changes how we're thinking about where comments and diffs live together anyways. And so it might not exist in this way, and like, so it could be like not a good effort thing if we're going to blow it up anyways.
Yeah, it does make sense. So, but yeah, I feel like if anything, that endpoint will be useful anyway, because so the restructuring, I don't expect us to redo the entire way diffs are loaded, but we might iterate on the ones we have, which means that we're probably going to need that anyway. So I feel like that's the one thing that I take out of these two discussions is, yeah, let's try to find what's happening with that endpoint, and probably if there's a bug, probably try to fix it because it's going to be useful for us in the future anyway. Matt, do you want me to create an issue for looking into the specific paths thing? Okay.
Yeah, I think that'd probably make the most sense. Yeah, and then we can link them to these issues.
All righty. All right. Potentially fixing it. Sweet. There's no other points on the agenda. Anybody has any other points to discuss before we go off? All righty then. Thank you so much for making the call. And I'll see you around. Bye, everyone. Thanks for your time.